A good Sunday afternoon to all of you. So we did a small viral session in the morning that was about slots and how it will affect, your taking of the exam and perceptions and everything. We are back to discussing CAT papers. So today we are going to do VARC from one of the earlier CAT papers. And let's begin, guys. So, hi, I'm Munira Lokhandwala, and I'm Calcutta alumna, a serial 100 percentiler in the CAT and a 99 percentiler in the GMAT. I also have a CAT verbal book published by Wiley and available on Amazon. So, I take sessions regularly on the Unacademy Crack CAT channel. I'm also taking a lot of sessions on the Unacademy app, guys. So please go to the Google Play Store, search for Unacademy Learning app, and download and install it. And within that, you have to go for the Plus CAT courses, right? So you're looking to go for the goal of CAT, right? And within that, you have to subscribe for the Plus courses. We also have a lot of special classes and free classes as well, guys. And we are doing a lot of sessions both for CAT 2020 students, where we are focusing on crash courses and revisers, and CAT 2021 students, right? So if you see the kind of courses coming up within CAT itself, right, you can see that there are a lot of courses that have already started, that are started, and you can enroll in as many courses as you want, right? This sort of flexibility, liberty, that you can view videos as many times as you want, right? I know a lot of institutions where there's a cap on how many times you can view videos. So all these are great benefits. Besides that, you also have regular test series, guys, which is not only CAT, but we also have test series on XAT, we have test series on NMAT, SNAP, CMAT, etc., right? So whatever examination is your goal, if you are, focused on a particular college, guys, we will have a batch, we will have a course, we'll have a test series on it, right? So this is a great platform. If getting into an MBA school right now is your first priority, then you have to be on an academy. We have humongous content, great content, and at the best possible price, right? So I hope to see you on Unacademy soon, guys. Which course to go for, that we can discuss towards the end of the session. But there's another great reason why you need to be on Unacademy as soon as possible, and that is the National Scholarship Test, right? So this is a test that we have started some time back. Every Sunday, you have a section test of 40 minutes on one of the section. So we started off on the 18th with maths, and 50 students have already scored and won vouchers of 5,000 rupees. Then on the 25th, we had a section test on LRDI. And this Sunday, on the 1st of November, guys, we are going to do a section test on VARC, right? And first of all, this is a great, well-designed test, keeping CAT in mind. Second, you get great insights during analysis. And third, guys, this is an open test, so your rank will be very relevant for the CAT, correct? Because right now, a lot of institutes, the kind of rank that they are giving you is only based on their set of students. So an open test is always a good idea to find out how you are doing in the whole population, right? So you have 4 reasons to take the exam: well-designed test, great analysis, relevant rank, right? And finally, those vouchers, guys. Let's not forget the Amazon vouchers. That's a lot of money, right? And you should take full advantage of it and take this test. So enroll as soon as you can, guys. There's only positive here, right? So yeah, with subscription to go for, we can discuss towards the end of the session. You can use my code Munira10 to get a great discount. So great, here is the bonus puzzle that I left you with. For any given cuboid, it is possible to measure up 3 different parameters, right? So what are those 3 different parameters? Perimeters. Yeah, what are those 3 perimeters? This is one of them. Correct? So you think of a ribbon that you're tying around a gift. You can tie the ribbon like this. You can tie the ribbon like this. Correct? And then you can also tie the ribbon with this, and so this like this, right? So the 3 possible ways in which you can tie a ribbon. So when I'm looking at this, right, let's call these dimensions. So this is dimension X, this is dimension Y, this is dimension Z. Right? So when I'm tying a ribbon, I'm using this one, correct? This ribbon 1. Okay. So I'm tying it around Y and Z. So the length of the ribbon 1 will be 2 twice of Y plus Z. Right? The length of the ribbon 2, so now let's say this is ribbon 2. I'm using X ka length and I'm using Z ka length. So it is twice of X plus Z. And ribbon 3 that I'm tying like this, right? This is your ribbon 3. I'm using Y and I'm using X. So it's very clear that you are using each of these parameters, right? In at least two, in exactly 2 of the ribbons. So these values that you have, the 3 values like 12, 16, 20, right? These are the 3 parameters. So I can say that, 12 is 1 of X plus Y, this is X plus Z, this is Y plus Z, each of them 2s are. So X plus Y, right? I can just find out for A, X plus Y, Y plus Z and X plus Z kitna hoga by just dividing by 2. So it's going to be 6, 8 and 10. Now if I add all of these 3, right, then I'll get twice of X plus Y plus Z. And that value, guys, is 24. Okay. Similarly for B, I can find X plus Y, right, Y plus Z by just dividing by 2. So B values will be 6, 8 and 12. And twice of X plus Y plus Z, right, is going to be 26. So what is X plus Y plus Z? So now for A, X plus Y plus Z, kitna hoga? And once I get X plus Y plus Z, I can compare it with X plus Y to get the value of Z. I can compare it with Y plus Z to get the value of X and so on, right? So then we can get values individually of X, Y and Z. So X plus Y plus Z is 12, in which case X is 6, Y is 4 and Z is 2. And the volume of this, right, turns out to be 48. Now it's very natural for us to think that 12, 16, 20 hai, 12, 16, 24 hai. So cuboid B has one perimeter that is greater, so definitely cuboid B has the greatest volume, right? So now let's find out, does cuboid B have the greatest volume? So B का x plus y plus z value is 13, जिसमें से x value is 7, right? Y value is 5 and z value is 1. So the product of the 3 is 35 and it is actually cuboid A which has the greater volume. So that is surprising but true, right? So there are always these tricky questions. Cuboid A here has the greater volume. Okay, great guys, let's get on to verbal now. So this verbal CAT test, right? Actual CAT test, it's a 99 CAT test. It had 55 questions and 5 passages. We did 27 questions and 3 passages last time. And today we are going to do the remaining 2 passages and 28 questions totally. So let's quickly read the passage. Since Second World War, the nation state has been regarded with approval by every political system and every ideology. In the name of modernization in the West, of socialism in the Eastern Bloc, and of the development in the Third World, it was expected to guarantee the happiness of individuals as citizens and of people as societies. So basically, अगर nation state होता है, and what is a nation state? That I think will be explained, correct? Then it guarantees the happiness of citizens. That was assumed, right? Now let's see. However, the state today appears to have broken down in many parts of the world. It has failed to guarantee either security or social justice and has been unable to prevent either international wars or civil wars. It was assumed to bring happiness, पर ऐसा कुछ हुआ नहीं है. Distributed by the claims of communities within it, correct? So because the nation state is a nation composed of different states, so that is distributed now. Instead of having a single ideology, it has multiple ideology. The nation state tries to repress their demands and to proclaim itself as the only guarantor of security of all. In the name of national unity, territorial integrity, equality of all its citizens, and non-partisan secularism, the state can use its powerful resources to reject the demands of the communities. It may even go so far as genocide to ensure that order prevails. Okay. So instead of helping communities, the nation state tries to repress their demands, right? And in the name of all these positive things, the state uses the powerful resources to reject the claims of the communities, and it may even go far as genocide. Genocide is when a big bunch of a group or a community is killed. As one observes the awakening of communities in different parts of the world, one cannot ignore the context in which identity issues arise. So you cannot ignore, right, why the background, the context, right? It is no longer a context of sealed frontiers and isolated regions, but it is one of the one of the integrated global systems. In a reaction to this trend towards globalization, communities everywhere are voicing their desire to exist, to use their power of creation, and to play an active part in national and international life. Okay, so instead of giving identity to different communities, you're giving an identity, right, to a global system. And in this trend, we are just trying to exist, and each of us, each community is trying to play an active part in national and international life. There are two ways in which the current upsurge in demands for the recognition of identities can be looked at. So people are demanding some identity, right? And what is the reason? On the positive side, the efforts by certain population groups to assert their identity can be regarded as liberation movements. So if a smaller identity, right, wants if a smaller group, population group, right, wants an identity, that is because they want to challenge the oppression and injustice. What these groups are doing, proclaiming that they are different, rediscovering the roots of their culture, or strengthening group solidarity, may accordingly be seen as a legitimate attempt. ये सही reason है for finding an identity, right? Because they are subjugated and they don't have dignity, so now they can enjoy a certain measure of dignity. On the downside, however, militant action for recognition tends to make such groups more deeply entrenched in their attitude and to make the cultural compartments even more watertight. So, अगर ये attitude के लिए, if these people are actually using, some militant terrorist group or whatever, right? Then their attitudes become more entrenched, they become more solid, they become more tough to change themselves. They are more unlikely. The assertion of identity then starts turning into self-absorption and isolation and is liable to slide into intolerance of others and towards ideas of ethnic cleansing. And as soon as you have a very watertight, fixed, inflexible identity, then you are intolerant of other people. Whereas continuous variations among people prevent drawing of clear dividing lines between the groups. So, people keep varying, they may move out of a group, right? So you can't put a clear line of division. Those militating for recognition of their group's identity arbitrarily chose a limited number of criteria. Okay, so if I want an identity for my group, I may choose religion as the criteria, language, skin color, right? So that their members recognize themselves primarily on these labels only. Whereas, our existence is made up of a lot of different labels. This distinction between the group in question and other groups is established by simplifying the feature selector. So ये जो एक feature है, like religion, you just simplify it, right? You don't get into the kind of nuances that are there in each religion, language, etc. Simplification also works by transforming groups into essences. Abstraction endowed with the capacity to remain unchanged through time. In some cases, people actually act as though the group has remained unchanged and talk, for example, about the history of nations and communities as if these entities survived for centuries without changing, with the same ways of acting and thinking, the same desires, anxieties, and aspirations. So when you simplify like this, you act as if the group will never change, but that is not true, right? History, if you actually see communities, if you actually see, they do change. So this sentence is actually a slightly sarcastic take, saying that they are not changing, they actually do change. Paradoxically, precisely because identity represents a simplifying fiction, creating uniform groups out of disparate people, that identity performs a cognitive function. So you start recognizing, right? It enables us to put names to ourselves and others, form some idea of who we are and who others are, and ascertain the place we occupy along with the others in world and society. The current upsurge to assert the identity of groups can thus be partly explained by the cognitive function performed by identity. However, that said, people would not go along as they do often in large numbers with the propositions put to them, in spite of the sacrifices they entail, if they were not had a very strong feeling of need for identity, a need to take stock of things and how and know who we are and where we come from and where we are going. Okay, so when you simplify features like this, you create uniform groups of people who are different, and then they start recognizing each other because of the identity. The identity lets them put a name to themselves and also to other people that they don't belong to us, right? So it lets them form some idea of who they are, right? And where do they come from. The current upsurge to assess the identity can hence be partly explained by the reason that people want to recognize themselves. But people would not do this if they didn't already have a very strong feeling for a need of identity. Okay. Identity is thus a necessity in a constantly changing world, but it can also be a potent source of violence and disruption. How can these two contradictory aspects of identity be reconciled? एक तो ये जरूरी है because people need identity, and second, it leads to violence. First, we must bear the arbitrary nature of identity categories in mind. Not so that we can eliminate all forms of identification, that is unrealistic, because identity is a cognitive we need to recognize, right? So it's a cognitive necessity. But simply to remind ourselves that each of us have several identities at the same time, right? So each of us are Indian, we have a particular language that we speak, so all of us have multiple identities. Second, since tears of nostalgia are being shed over the past, we recognize that culture is constantly being recreated by cobbling together fresh and original elements and countercultures. There are in our own country a large number of synthetic, right? So synthetically made cults wherein modern elements are blended with traditional values of people of different communities, and we venerate saints or divinities of particular faiths. Okay, so we feel nostalgic over the past and we constantly recognize the culture change hote rehta hai. So we make all these synthetic cults, right, where we try and idolate saints. Okay, such cults and movements are characterized by continuous inflow and outflow of members, which prevent them from taking on a self-perpetuating existence of their own and hold our hope for the future, indeed perhaps for the only possible future. Finally, the nation state must respond to the identity urges of its constituent communities and to their legitimate quest for security and social justice. So the nation should recognize why people are looking for identity. It must do so by inventing what the French philosopher and sociologist Raymond Aron called peace through law, that would guarantee justice both to the state and to its parts and respect the claim of both reason and emotions. The problem is one of reconciling nationalist demands with an exercise of democracy. So, exercise of democracy is when people are given identities, right, with peace. Great. So, let's now look at questions. According to the author, happiness of individuals was expected to be guaranteed in the name of. So happiness was expected to be guaranteed in the name of the nation state, right? Which is basically development in the third world. It's not socialism, it's not Eastern Bloc modernization, ये सब चीज नहीं mentioned है. It is basically, and it's not East and West, it's basically the developing countries है. So वो third world countries है, उनमें nation state के developments है. Demands for recognition of identities can be viewed, right? Both positively and negatively, people want an identity, but people are also creating a us versus them. It's liberating also, and there's militant action also. And people want to rediscover cultural roots, and that can also go towards intolerance of others. So it is all of the above. Going by the author's exposition of the nature of identity, which of the following statements is untrue? So identity represents creating, ये बताया गया है clearly कि you're making uniform groups of different people. People want identity. It is a cognitive necessity. ये भी बोला गया है. Okay, so both these statements are true according to the author. Third भी बोला गया है. So answer here is none of the above. According to the author, the nation state, right, has fulfilled its potential. No, its potential was to make people happy, and it has not fulfilled that. But it's willing to do anything to preserve order. This has been given, right? If we just go back and check here. The state to reject, it may even to ensure that order prevails. It can do anything to ensure that order prevails. It's the end of the first paragraph, right? So B is looking good. It does not generate security for all of its citizens. That is an extreme option because of all. It has been a major force in preventing, not at all. It may lead to it, right? Because of the usage of force. So answer is option B. Which of the following views of the nation state cannot be attributed to the author? So what is it that the author does not believe in? It has not guaranteed peace and security. Author believes in this. It may go, ये तो हमने अभी अभी पढ़ा है. This is also true. It represents the demands of communities within it. No, it does not. It tries to suppress. ये भी बताया गया है. Right, is unable. ये तो बताया ही है. So answer is option C. If you just check again that first paragraph में ही ये सब है. Distributed, right, by the claims, tries to repress their demands. Correct? So it has not been able to prevent international wars. So the answer here is option C. Right? Great. Let's move on to the next passage. So next passage was a very long passage, guys. You can see it's pretty long. And it had 6 questions to it. So this is the passage that a lot of students didn't attempt in that CAT, which is fair enough. Topic wise also, it doesn't seem very easy to read. It's not easy to read. The persistent patterns in the way nations fight reflect their cultural and historical traditions and deeply rooted attitudes that collectively make up their strategic culture. Okay, so the way persistent patterns, the patterns are always there, correct? The way nations fight. These patterns provide insights that go beyond what can be learned just by comparing armaments of the weapons and divisions. In the Vietnam War, the strategic tradition of the United States called for forcing the enemy to fight a mass battle in an open area, where superior weapons would prevail. The United States was trying to refight Second World War in the jungles of Southeast Asia against an enemy with no intention of doing so. So, in unke attitude, right, gives us a good idea of the strategic culture. And Vietnam War ka example is given, right? Some British historians describe the Asian way of war as one of indirect attacks. So how would Vietnam would have fought? This is the Vietnam way of fighting. Avoiding frontal attacks meant to overpower an opponent. This is because of Asian history and geography. The great distances and harsh terrain have often made it difficult to execute the sort of open field clashes allowed by flat terrain and relatively compact size of Europe. Europe is fairly compact, doesn't have too many hills, so the terrain is flat. Terrain is the land is flat. Whereas यहाँ पे there are hills, mountains, right? So a very different strategic tradition arose in Asia. The bow and arrow were metaphors for an Eastern way of war. Right? So they used to hide behind trees or whatever and use bow and arrows. By its nature, the arrow is an indirect weapon. Fired from a distance of hundreds of yards, it does not necessitate immediate physical contact with the enemy. Thus, it can be fired from hidden positions. When fired from behind a ridge, the parrot seems to come out of nowhere, taking the enemy by surprise. Okay, so if you're behind a mountain and you throw these arrows, you don't even know where the arrows are coming from. The tradition of this kind of fighting is captured in the classical strategic writing of the East. The 2000 years worth of Chinese writings on war constitutes the most subtle writing on the subject in any language. Not until Clausewitz did the West produce a strategic theorist to match the sophistication of Sun Tzu, whose Art of War was written 2300 years earlier. So this is the important thing, right? Okay, there was a Chinese strategist, war strategist, who wrote 2300 years ago, and his writing or her writing, right, was very subtle, very good. This is a compliment. Subtle is something that's not obvious. In Sun Tzu and other Chinese writings, the highest achievement of arms is to defeat an adversary without fighting. Okay, so you have to defeat your enemy without fighting. He wrote, to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the acme of skill. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the supreme excellence. Actual combat is just one among many means towards the goal of subduing an adversary. Okay, so if I want to subdue an enemy, fighting war is just one of the ways of doing it. War contains too many surprises to be a first resort. It can lead to big, ruinous losses, big losses, as has been seen time and again. It can have the unwanted effect of inspiring heroic efforts in an enemy, as the US learned in Vietnam and as the Japanese found out after Pearl Harbor. Right? So after Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, that is when the atomic bombs were thrown. So then, you inspire heroic efforts in the enemy by fighting against them. Aware of the uncertainties of a military campaign, Sun Tzu advocated war only after the most thorough preparations, even though it should be quick and clean. Only when you prepare thoroughly, then only it will be quick and clean. Ideally, the army is just an instrument to deal the final blow to an enemy already weakened by isolation, poor morale, and disunity. Ever since Sun Tzu, the Chinese have been seen as masters of subtlety who take measured actions to manipulate an adversary without his knowledge. So they've been using his book and they've become great at manipulating enemies. Okay. The dividing line between war and peace can be obscure, right? It's not a line that's easy to see. It's a line that is tough to find. Low-level violence often is the backdrop to a larger strategic campaign. The unwitting victim, focused on the day-to-day activities, never realizes what's happening to him until it's too late. History holds many examples. The Viet Cong lured French and US infantry deep into the jungle, weakening the morale over several years. The mobile army of the US was designed to fight on the plains of Europe where it could quickly move unhindered from one spot to the next. The jungle did more than make quick movement impossible. Breaking down into smaller units and scattered in isolated bases, US forces were deprived of the feeling of support and protection that ordinarily comes from being a big part of a big army. So here Vietnam is given as an example on how you have these low-level regular violence, right? And then their morale is disrupted, they feel disunited, and how that leads to the loss of a war. The isolation of US troops in Vietnam was not just a logistical detail, something that could be overcome by, for instance, bringing in reinforcements by helicopter. In a big army, reinforcements are readily available. It was Napoleon who realized the extraordinary effects on morale that come from being part of a large formation. Okay, so it is not just morale. Whenever you are a part of a big army, you already have good morale basically. And it is not about reinforcements, it's about being part of a big army. Just the knowledge of it lowers the soldier's fear and increases his aggressiveness. In the jungle and on isolated bases, this feeling was removed. The thick vegetation slowed down the reinforcements and made it difficult to find stranded units. Soldiers felt that they were on their own. More important, by altering the way the war was fought, the Vietcong stripped the US of its belief in the inevitability of victory, as it had done to the French before them. Okay, so because of this, all these tactics, US stopped believing that they will win. Morale was high when these armies first went to Vietnam. Okay, so when they first went for fighting, there was high morale. Only after many years of debilitating and demoralizing, debilitating means reductions in feeling healthy, right? And yahan pe your morale is coming down. Did Hanoi launch its decisive attacks at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 and again Saigon in 1975? It should be recalled that in the final push to victory, the North Vietnamese abandoned the jungle guerrilla tactics completely, committing their entire army of 20 divisions to pushing the South Vietnamese into collapse. So yahan pe after that, those small attacks, right, low level violence, they finally came completely with one full army to attack the enemy. This final battle with the enemy's army all in one place was the one that the US had desperately wanted to fight in 1965. When it did come out into the open in 1975, Washington had already withdrawn its forces and there was no possibility of reintervention. The Japanese early in Second World War used a modern form of the indirect technique attack, one that relied on stealth and surprise for its effects. At Pearl Harbor in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia, stealth and surprise were attained by sailing under radio silence so that the Navy's movements could not be tracked. Moving troops aboard ships in Southeast Asia made it appear that the Japanese army was also invisible. Okay, so they mostly hid from their enemy, right? And they achieved all that by maintaining radio silence. So if you don't use the radio, then nobody knows how the sails are moving, right? So now, finally, attacks against Hawaii and Singapore seemed to the British and American defenders to come from nowhere. Why? Because they were all sailing under stealth. They got their troops also in some other part of the country, right? So nobody knew about it. In Indonesia and Philippines, the Japanese attack was even faster than the German blitz against France in the West, right? So not only was it stealthy, it was also quick. The greatest military surprise in American history have all been in Asia. So the Asians basically are fighting a different kind of war. Surely there's something going on here beyond the purely technical difficulties of detective enemy movements, right? So it's not just that you cannot detect their movements, there must be something else. Pearl Harbor, the Chinese intervention in Korea, and the Tet Offensive in Vietnam all came out of a tradition of surprise and stealth. So it's a combination of both, always. US technical intelligence, the location of enemy units and their movements, was greatly improved after each surprise, but there was no noticeable improvement for them to predict what would happen next. Okay, so they use this knowledge of every attack, right, and they improved their movements, but they could not predict the next attack. That is always a problem, right? So you use the previous attack, but you cannot predict what's going to happen next. There is a cultural divide here, not just a technical one. Even when it was possible to track an army with intelligence satellites, as when Iraq invaded Kuwait or when Syria and Egypt attacked Israel, surprise was achieved. Okay, so it is not just a technical problem, it is also culturally, we are too different, the US and the Asians, we are two different people. The United States was stunned by Iraq's attack on Kuwait, even though it had satellite pictures of Iraqi troops massing at the border. So it's a cultural problem, right? The exception that proves the point that cultural differences obscure the West's understanding of Asian behavior was the Soviet Union's 1979 invasion of Afghanistan. Okay, so now after all these examples, which are more or less reinforcing the same point about surprise and stealth, we have an exception. We have an example that does not work. Okay. This was fully anticipated and understood in advance. Jab Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, right, the US understood it. There was no surprise because the United States understood Moscow's worldview and thinking. It could anticipate Soviet action almost as well as the Soviets themselves because the Soviet Union was really a Western country and not an Asian country. Not surprising, right? So the reason they could anticipate Russian Soviet Russia's move was because the Russians almost acted like Western people. Their strategy, their philosophy was that of a Western country, not an Asian country. Okay. So the difference between the Eastern and the Western way of war is striking. It's a very big difference. The West's great strategic writer Clausewitz, शुरू में भी इसकी बात हुई थी, correct? Linked war to politics, as did Sun Tzu. Both were opponents of militarism. Correct? What is militarism? Turning war over to the generals. Correct? So Sun Tzu, as we said, he said that fighting should come in the final attempt, if at all. You should subdue the enemy without fighting. That is Sun Tzu's point of view. But that's where the similarity ends. So the Western philosophy, Clausewitz is the Western philosophy, is different from the Asian philosophy. So the similarity ends there. Wrote that the way to achieve a larger political purpose is by destroying the enemy's army. That is what the Western point of view is. After observing Napoleon conquer Europe by smashing enemy armies to bits, made his famous remark that combat is the continuation of politics by violent means. So war, according to Clausewitz, right, is basically a continuation of politics and fighting. Morale and unity are important, but they should be harnessed. Harness means don't use it, save it up for the final ultimate battle. If the Eastern way of war is embodied by the stealthy archer, bows and arrows का भी बात already हुआ है. The metaphorical, so the similar Western counterpart is the guy with the sword charging forward. तो वो छुप के दूर से कुछ नहीं करते, वो आगे से, right? They have very little physical distance. They want to fight a combative war, seeking a decisive showdown, eager to administer the blow that will obliterate, matlab completely destroy the enemy. In this view, war proceeds along a fixed course and occupies a finite extent of time. अगर फटाफट खुलम खुला, right, if you fight a war आमने सामने, then the course of the war, कि उसके outcomes क्या होंगे, that becomes fixed and it takes up a fixed amount of time, like a play in 3 acts, beginning, fighting and end, correct? And the end decides the issue for good. That is the Western way of thinking. But when things don't work out quite this way, the Western military mind feels tremendous frustration. Sun Tzu's great disciples Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh are respected in Asia for their clever use of indirection and deception to achieve an advantage over stronger adversaries. But in the West, their approach is seen as underhanded and devious. So the Western people feel that they are men of honor, right? हम जो करते हैं सामने से करते हैं. So they see the Chinese as, devious, यानी छुपा के करते हैं. To the American strategic mind, the Viet Cong guerrilla did not fight fairly. They should have come out and fought into the open and fought like men instead of hiding in the jungle and sneaking around like a cat in the night. So it's a completely different perception of war. It's a very interesting passage, slightly difficult to read, as I said. But more or less, it just compares the Western way of war with the Asian way of war and how the West perceives the East and how the East achieves an advantage against formidable opponents, right? So great, guys. Let us now look at questions. According to the author, the main reason for the US losing the Vietnam War was that they couldn't fight against the Asian way of war, right? They couldn't do that. Understood the local terrain better. It's not just the understanding, and anyways, the Vietnamese would understand it. It's because the local terrain was not flat, that was the problem. So this is out. The lack of support. No support tha, reinforcements the, it was not that. The failure of the US, it did mobilize its military strength. They came in with a lot of morale, but they couldn't fight a war on the Asian terms. They lost out because of that. So answer is option D. Which of the following statements does not describe the Asian way of war? Okay. So I want an option that does not talk about the Asian way of war. Indirect attacks, this is Asian, right? Swordsman charging forward, this is a Western, so this is good, this is not Asian. Manipulation of an adversary, this is also Asian, right? Subduing an enemy, this is Sun Tzu's best way of fighting, so this is Asian, right? So options A, C, D are Asian, sorry. B is the one that's not, right? Great. Next one. Which of the following is not one of Sun Tzu's ideas? Actual combat is the principal means. ये तो again West idea है. West का idea है, right? War should be after thorough preparation. This is Sun Tzu. It's linked to politics. This is mostly a continuation, right, of the Asian philosophy. War should not be left to the generals alone. Yes, they were against militarism. So answer here is option B. Right? Great. The difference in the concepts of war of Clausewitz and Sun Tzu is best characterized by Sun Tzu's support for militarism as against Clausewitz supports as Sun Tzu's opposition to it. Yeah, so Sun Tzu didn't like it, but that is not the main difference. The main difference in the approach is whether it should be frontal, right? Whether it should be devious, whether it should be obvious, right? All that is the reason. It is not the relative degrees of sophistication. If at all people thought Sun Tzu wrote a brilliant piece, right? It's not just their attitude of guerrilla warfare. It is the structure, time and sequence of a war. This gets everything together. Structure may you can say they are not frontal. Time may you can say war comes later, low level violence comes in the beginning. Correct? So all this takes care of all the attributes. The answer is option D. To the Americans, the approach seemed devious because they did not fight like men out in the open. Very clear, almost direct. Not that they allied with the enemies, not that they took strategic advice, and not just bows. This is an example, right? It's not as if Viet Cong used this all the time. So answer is option A. According to the author, the greatest military surprises in American history have been in Asia because the Americans cannot fight against Asians properly. Failed to implement? No, they could implement, but these guys didn't want to fight it the American way. Were unable to use their technologies. No, we could, like Iraq ka example diya hai ki technology work. It's a cultural difference. Fail to understand the culture. That is your answer, best answer. So questions are pretty easy. It was just the passage was too long to read, right? So great, guys. Let us look at jumble paragraphs. Making people laugh is tricky. Okay. This is the first sentence. There are indications that in substituting the hard sell for a more entertaining approach, some agencies have rather thrown out the baby with the bath water. Okay. So starting with laughing and then you're substituting hard sell with an entertaining approach. At times, the intended humor may simply not come off. Making people laugh while trying to sell them something is a tougher challenge, since the commercial can fall flat on two grounds. So, making people laugh is more tricky. So, B should come after the first sentence. Right? If you can see, and now we can check with this option. At times, may not simply come off, right? Again, it is rarely sufficient simply to amuse in order to reap the sales benefit, which do amuse but do not even begin to set the cash registers ringing. So C is an example to D, and hence BADC is the best option. Right? Great, guys. The next para jumble. First sentence. Picture a termite colony occupying a tall mud hump on an African plain. So अब ये picture continue होना चाहिए, correct? Now let's read the last sentence. How can we account for a mysterious ability to respond to events like this on the distant surface? Okay, so I want this mysterious ability just towards the end, and I want to picture the termite quality right in the beginning. Okay, so now let us look at sentences in between. Hungry predators often invade the colony and unsettle the balance. The colony flourishes only if the proportion of soldiers to workers remain roughly the same, so that the queen and workers can be protected by the soldiers and the queen and soldiers can be serviced by the workers. Okay, so there is a balance here, proportion to soldiers, right? This balance gets disrupted with hungry predators, so there's a very clear BA link. And if you check options, guys, you can eliminate option C, you can eliminate option D. But its fortunes are presently restored because the immobile queen, walled in well below the ground level, lays eggs not only in large enough numbers but also in the varying proportions required. The hump is alive with worker termites and soldier termites going about the distinct kinds of business. This is the picture. So it has to start with D. So option B is best. D ke baad you talk about flourishes. When does this colony flourish? Right? And then often invade and disrupt the balance, but you can restore the balance. And this is the mysterious ability, the balance restoration, right? So answer is option B. Great. According to recent research, the critical period for developing language skills is between the age of 3 and 5 years. Their comprehension of language is therefore very high. There means kiska. Okay, great. The ready read to child already has a large vocabulary and a sense of grammar and sentence structure. Children who are read to in these years have a far better chance of reading well in school instead of doing well in all their subjects. These years. Which years? 3 and 5. So B has to start, right? And if I look at options, option can only be D. Let us check D. Correct? This correlation is far and away the highest yet found between home influences and school success. And the reason is actually quite simple, and this is the reason is therefore very high. Children ka vocabulary is therefore high. So best here is option D. Right? Great. Next one. High-powered outboard motors were considered to be one of the major threats to the survival of the beluga whales. Belugas seem to have used their well-known sensitivity to noise to evolve an avoidance strategy to outsmart hunters and their powerful technologies. तो पहले ऐसा लगा था, पहले was considered पहले. मतलब this beach में you are going to show how this high-powered outboard motors have not been a threat. So let's look at with these hunters, with these, right? That's what we need to find out. Hunters could approach belugas within hunting range and profit from its inner skin and blubber. To escape an approaching motor, have learned to dive to the ocean bottom and stay there for up to 20 minutes, by which time the confused predator has left. Today, however, even with much more powerful engines, it is difficult to come close because the whales seem to disappear suddenly just when you thought you had them in your sights. How are they disappearing? Because they're jumping to the ocean bottom. So CB link here. Right? So can eliminate this and this. When the first outboard engines arrived in the early 30s, one came across 4 HP and 8 HP motors. With these, so DA link here. Right? So answer is option A. A DA. And now they go to the ocean bottom. So they have used this sensitivity to have a avoidance strategy, right? So fairly easy. Abhi tak ke sare easy the, guys. Actual cat jumble paragraphs. The reconstruction of history by post-revolutionary science texts involves more than a multiplication of historical misconstructions. कि तुम science से history को reconstruct करते हो, so you have a lot of errors. Because they aim quickly, no, we will read the end also. Science has reached its present state by a series of individual discoveries and inventions that, when gathered together, constitute the modern body of technical knowledge. Now let's read each of the sentences. Let's see what will continue with this misconstruction. Okay. Because they aim quickly to acquaint the student, it can be misconstruction, right, with what the contemporary scientific community thinks it knows. Textbooks treat the various experiments. So this they is actually textbooks. Concepts, laws as separately and as nearly seriatim, always accurate as possible. Those misconstructions render revolutions invisible. So B should start. Right? The arrangement of the still visible material implies a process that if it existed in science text, right? तो ये साइंस टेक्स्ट के बारे में यहाँ फिर ये टेक्स्ट बुक आएगा तो बीए का क्लियर लिंक है and it has to start. So now let us read it like this, right? And because the textbooks are treated as separately, right? As pedagogy, this technique is unexceptionable. You cannot accept it, right? But when combined with the generally unhistorical air of science writing, one impression is likely to follow. And what is that impression? That science has reached its present state. So answer has to be option A, BABC. Right? Great, guys. These are now jumbled paragraphs without beginning and ending sentence. So we'll of course read it vertically to get a sense of the kind of links possible. In rejecting the functionalism, thus the analysis. So thus should come after some proper analysis, right? Okay. At the extreme, the political model holds. Okay. So in rejecting the functionalism, either wholly or partially, there is often a move towards a political model of organization theory. Okay. Thus the analysis would shift to the power resources possessed by different groups and the way they use these resources to shape the organizational structure. At the extreme in one set of writings, the growth of administrators is held to be completely unrelated and to be caused totally by the political pursuit of self-interest. The political model holds that are pursued in organization life through the exercise of power and influence. So ये model का analysis is shifting to the power resources. So you're looking at a DB link. Right? And that means you can eliminate two options. Now does DB start? A has to come before D. The political model, you move towards it and then the political model comes here. So it is ADB. And then finally C. First option. Yeah. Next. Group decision making, however, nature itself is an intricate system of checks and balances. In institutions also, when human interventions alter this delicate, so this hai, also hai, okay, however hai, so there are a lot of links here, right? Group decision making, however, does not necessarily fully guard against arbitrariness and anarchy, for individual capriciousness can now get substituted by collusion of group members. People can collude instead of having individual quirks. Nature itself is an intricate system of checks and balances meant to preserve the delicate balance between various environmental factors that affect our ecology. Okay. This delicate balance would have to be nature's checks and balances. So there's a clear BD link. Correct? So let's now read B ke baad D. When human interventions alter this delicate balance, the outcomes have been seen to be disastrous. In institutions also there's a need to have a place, right? A system of checks and balances which inhibits the concentration of power in the hands of only some individuals. But फिर भी group decision making does not necessarily fully guard against arbitrariness. So great, CA का भी clear link है, तो answer has to be BDCA, which is your option D. Right? Great. Let's move on to the next one. He was born weary and soul weary. To his horror, it was one of those nights. He reached for his calendar. Wow, so this is a fiction piece. Let's read all of this slowly. He was born weary and soul weary and found himself muttering, either I can't manage this place or it is unmanageable. Right? To his horror, he realized that he had become the victim of an amorphous, unwitting, unconscious conspiracy to immerse him in routine work that had no significance. It was one of those nights when the office clock was moving towards 4 in the morning, was still not through with the incredible mass of papers stacked before him. Great, this is the introduction. Sab jagah he hai. Yahan pe Benes is mentioned. C has to start. And if I just look at that, guys, answer is only one option. So C say you're saying कि हाँ ये 4 बजे he is अकेला, right? He was born weary and soul weary, so CA होगा. He reached for his calendar and ran his eyes down each hour, half hour and quarter hour. To his horror, so CADB is perfect. Answer is option B. Right? Great. Next one. 47 and 48. With that, I swallowed the shampoo and obtained the most realistic results almost on the spot. Shuffled away while was wrapping up. I intended to stage. Okay, so great. The man shuffled away to make up a prescription, and after a moment, I got through on the shop telephone to the consulate intimating my location. Then, while the pharmacist was wrapping up a 6-ounce bottle of the mixture, I groaned and inquired whether he could give me something for acute gastric cramp. I intended to stage a sharp gastric attack, and entering an old-fashioned pharmacy, I asked. So this is the intention, and you are entering every C, B, and A, correct? Is talking about what's happening in the pharmacy. So you first need to enter the pharmacy. So D has to begin, right? So then you can eliminate C and D. Option D. Okay. So you get into this, right? And then while he's wrapping up a 6-ounce bottle of the mixture, you then start acting up. And then you swallow the shampoo later on. So you can't have DACB. After entering you straight away, with that means what? With after asking you straight away, can't swallow the shampoo has to be given to you. So D is out, correct? So while he's wrapping, right, then he shuffles towards the back, and that is when you swallow the shampoo and obtain the most realistic result. So answer is option A. Since then, intelligent tests have been used mostly. In other words, intelligence Binet developed. So, okay, the actual cat mein there were 4 questions with 4 options, and this 5th question has 5 options. So this can happen, guys. Number of options can change. So if you now look right, since then, in other words, intelligence is expressed at below the develop the first set of such tests. Which tests? Intelligence tests. So एक तो E is a perfect introduction, and then develop the first set of such tests. तो ED से शुरू होने वाला एक ही option है, so we'll read like this, right? Can be measured by tests, develop the first set of such tests, needed special attention. Since then, since he developed, have been mostly used to separate dull children from average or bright so that special education can be provided to the dull. So abhi tak it is making sense. Intelligence is expressed as an intelligent quotient, and tests are developed to indicate what an average child of a certain age can do. Okay. In other words, intelligent test gives us a norm for each age. So CB ka bhi clear link hai. So we can eliminate some options right there and then, right? So out of the C and D as an option, answer is option C because E has to begin. Right? Great, guys. Let's move to some critical reasoning. Three airlines, IA, JA, and SA, operate on the Delhi-Mumbai route. Okay, we want to add credence to the general belief. To increase the number of seats sold, SA reduced its fare, and this was emulated by IA and J immediately. The general belief was that the volume of air travel would increase as a result. If you reduce the fare, there'll be more people who will travel. Okay, so you want to add some credibility to this belief. So increase in probability of the three airlines that may take place, right? But I want to show that the number of people who traveled on this route increased. Okay. Extension of the discount scheme to other routes के साथ कुछ लेना देना नहीं है. Shows that air travelers in India are price conscious. This is best. So if you reduce price, the number of travelers will go up. So C is better than A. Shows that as much as 80% is company sponsored. If it is company sponsored, then price will play a smaller role. Which of the following can be inferred from the above passage? According to McNeil, a Brahmin priest was expected to be able to recite at least one of the Vedas. The practice was essential for several centuries when the Veda had not yet been written down. It must have had a selective effect since priests would have been recruited from those able or willing to memorize long passages. So this is interesting, right? You need to know at least one Veda properly. And so this actually becomes an elimination thing. You only select priests who can memorize long passages. It must have helped in the dissemination of the work since a memorized passage can be duplicated many times. Okay, so if you can actually just keep repeating the memorized passage, then other people will also end up remembering it and it can be duplicated. Can be inferred was a Brahmin's obligation. No, you just need to know at least one, not reciting the Vedas in general. Okay, so this is a little extreme and hence this is out. The Vedic priest was like a recorded audio cassette. Yeah, for that Veda, definitely. He studied the behavior that we don't know. Right? I can make a statement about Brahmin priest without studying the behavior. So inference, guys, is something that has to be true. And C need not be true. Vedic hymns had not been scripted. Of course, they had been scripted. This is out of question, right? So best here is option B. Which one of the following, if it were to happen, weakens the conclusion? Developed countries have made adequate provisions for social security for senior citizens. State insurers as well as private ones offer Medicare and pension benefits to people who can no longer earn. Okay. In India, with the collapse of the joint family system, the traditional shelter of the elderly has disappeared. And the state, faced with a financial crunch, is not in a position to provide social security. So it is advisable to give serious thought to building a financial base for itself. This is the conclusion. Okay, generally developed countries में social, senior citizens के रहने करने का, there is some insurance, there is some social security that helps out. But India में, because earlier joint family system was helping out, अभी वो नहीं है. So we need to ensure, the working population needs to ensure to build a financial base for itself. I want to weaken it. So I want to show that maybe, even in the absence of joint family, someone is caring for the elders. The investable income as a proportion will grow in the future. So what? I need to save. Whether it grows or does not grow, I need to save. Is underdeveloped, that it will be extensively privatized in the future. Right. But ये developed countries के लिए insurance sectors plays a role, not for India. India is on a path that will take it to a developed country status with all its positive R. So by the time the working population grows older, India also has become a developed country with all its implications. So ये भी होगा. So C is looking very good, right? Yeah. If the working population builds a stronger financial base, there will be a revival of the joint. No. Right? This is C is better than D. Right? Great, guys. Next question. Various studies. Before that, which one of the following statements, if true, can be used to provide best supporting evidence for the surmise? So I want to support the surmise. Are forested and hilly regions, and in general areas where biodiversity is high, are the places where poverty appears to be high. तो जहाँ पे भी there are lot of species, lot of plants, वहाँ पे there's a lot of poverty, and these same areas are the one where educational performance seems to be poor. Okay. So biodiversity means lot of poor, and education performance is also poor. Therefore, you can assume that even disregarding poverty, biodiversity means poor education. You're missing a step. So I want to support this. I want to support this slightly illogical thing. Okay, wherever there's biodiversity, educational performance is poor. In regions where there is little variety in flora, educational performance is seen to be as good with high variety in flora, where poverty levels are high. So if the variety in flora plays no role in educational performance, then our argument straight away becomes wrong. We want to strengthen, so this can't be the answer. Regions which show high biodiversity also exhibit poor education performance at low levels of poverty. You don't want to talk about levels of poverty, right? Regions which show high biodiversity reveal high levels of poverty and poor educational performance. So high biodiversity, high levels of poverty, they go together. This does not work. In fact, B in that sense is better. You're saying poor education performance. So you're saying poverty is not important. It's only high biodiversity. So let's keep B. Let's get rid of C. In regions where there is low biodiversity at all levels of poverty, educational performance is seen to be good. But we want to show कि high के साथ क्या होता है, low के साथ क्या होता है, not necessary. So answer is option B. Right? Great, guys. Cigarettes constitute which of the following bolster the conclusion that reducing duties will expand the tax base? Constitute a mere 20% of tobacco consumption in India, and fewer than 15% of the 200 million tobacco users consume cigarettes. Yet these 15% contribute nearly 90% of the tax revenues. The punitive cigarette taxation regime has kept the tax base narrow, and reducing taxes will expand this base. So basically tax इतना ज़्यादा है कि out of 100 people only 15 smoke cigarettes. Because of high taxes 85 may actually be chewing tobacco. तो अगर तुम taxes कम करोगे तो some of these tobacco chewers may actually start smoking cigarettes is what they're saying, and hence the base will go up. The Cigarette Manufacturers Association has decided to indulge in aggressive promotion. No, that will not help. That is not going to help our argument. We need to show कि तुम price कम करोगे तो more people will start smoking. So people who smoke or chew tobacco, look at the price. B is best. I hope you can see how good B is. Right? That if price is reduced, then people will shift. Cigarette manufacturers are lobbying for a reduction on duties. An increase in duties may lead to a shift in favor of cigarette smoking. May lead non-cigarette tobacco. In fact, instead of reducing taxes on cigarette, you are increasing taxes somewhere else. That is not so helpful. So best is answer B. Right? Great, guys. Here is now a Chotu reasoning passage with 2 questions. Unseasonableness is a tendency to do socially permissible things at the wrong time. So that is why season has to do with timing. कि तुम चीजें सही कर रहे हो पर गलत टाइम पे कर रहे हो. The unseasonable man is the sort of person who comes to confide in you when you are busy. He serenades. Serenades means woos, right? Or takes care of his beloved. थोड़ा flirt करता है when she is ill. He asked a man who has just lost money by paying a bill for a friend to pay a bill for him. So his timing is wrong. चीजें तो फिर भी ठीक है. Invites a friend to go for a ride just after the friend has finished a long car trip. He is eager to offer services which are not wanted, but which cannot be politely refused. If he is present at an arbitration, he stirs up dissension between the two parties who are really anxious to agree, such is the unseasonable man. So the unseasonable man does not help at all, right? So what does he tend to do, guys? He tends to entertain. No, ये तो example है. Okay, he does things at the wrong time. Is he a successful arbitrator? No, he actually dissension is to put disagreement. So ये भी नहीं है. Is he helpful when solicited? Maybe, but that's not given here. Okay, how when he's asked for help does this fellow behave? We don't know. But he tells a long story to people who have heard it many times before. This is yeah. So again, he does something wrong. So D is best. The unseasonable man tends to. What does he tend to do? Bring a higher bidder to a salesman who has just closed a deal to make him feel bad, right? Disclose confidential information. No, ये act ही गलत है. He does the right thing. ऐसा नहीं है कि वो गलत चीजें करता है. He does the right thing, but the timing is wrong. ये B में act ही गलत है. Sing the praises of the bride when he goes to a wedding. This is right thing, right time. Sleep late and rise early. This may also be right thing, right time. ये है गलत timing. So answer is A, right? Great guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's session. Here is the puzzle for tomorrow, right? You have an isosceles trapezium. Isosceles trapezium means the side BA is equal to the side CD, right? They share the same base 4. AB and DC is 1 each. You have to find BC. So do give this some thought, guys. I'll see you again. Oops, this is a little wrong. I'll see you again tomorrow when we do some DILR questions at 12:30, right, guys? And I can see you on the Unacademy app. So please subscribe to the app as soon as possible. I've already mentioned the NST National Scholarship Test, guys. Let's not forget that. And besides that, okay, besides the test, where the first 50 scorers win as much as 5,000 rupees. There's another great news. I'm launching a plus course that is starting from the 4th of November, where I will be teaching LRDI. So it's great timing for both 2020 aspirants and even for CAT 2021 aspirants, right? And guys, I know there's a lot of free content available everywhere. Why should you come on Unacademy? So the kind of atmosphere, environment that you get in YouTube is just no comparison to the kind of awesome atmosphere that you get in Unacademy, right? So you can have these live polls, you can have some leaderboards, you can chat straight with the instructor, correct? So live polls, leaderboards, tests are conducted, you get feedback for the test, and you get analysis, right? And you can put in your questions that the instructor can solve straight away. So this sort of doubt clearing doesn't happen in any other environment, and you must take advantage of it, right? Which subscription to go for? Well, if you're a CAT 20 aspirant, then you should look at the 6-month program, because right after the CAT you have XAT, you have NMAT, SNAP, you have a lot of exams. So the 6-month program will make a lot of sense. If you're confused between CAT 20 and CAT 21, or you're focused on 21, guys, then you should look at the 2-year package. It doesn't come to much at all, and we'll be there to guide you throughout, whether it is test taking, whether it is a structured batch, right? Do use my code Munira10 to get